Hey everyone, and welcome to my Assassin's Creed tier list. Anyone who knows me knows I've always loved the Assassin's Creed series, so I thought it'd be cool to give my thoughts on how they stack up to one another. I've got an entire shelf full of statues of the characters, my first tattoo was the Assassin's Creed logo, and I've completed almost the entire series, so I think that qualifies me enough to talk about them. As for which game I haven't finished, I'm sure you can guess, but we'll talk about that later. So here's what we're going to do. I'm not doing every Assassin's Creed game, just the mainline games, else we'd be here forever. I'll be going through them in chronological order of release, discussing the reasons why I chose the place for each, and then moving on to the next. I'm going to assume, seeing as you're watching this, that you're reasonably familiar with the series, so I'm not going to give a breakdown of the games or anything. Also, I've not included Rogue, mainly because as far as I've always been aware, that was a spin-off and not a mainline game, though it's supposed to be pretty good, so maybe it'd be worth checking out at some point. Finally, I already know some of my choices are controversial, so you can let me know how wrong I am in the comments. Now then, let's go. Assassin's Creed. The first of my possibly controversial picks, but I can't put this any lower than okay. I know it's dated, I know it drags at times, and I know that the ending is pretty rough, but without it we wouldn't have the series at all. While at times a bit boring, it laid all the groundwork that the later games built off, and there are also games in the series I definitely like even less. This game is honestly one of the main reasons I even bought a PS3, before which I'd only ever been a Nintendo kid. I saw a friend playing it on their PS3, and from that point on I knew I had to get it, and I'm glad I did. Assassin's Creed 2. Easily the best game in the series, which if you think about it is kinda depressing. There's no one entry better than this, and the fact that this was only the second entry in a series with, when you include the spin-offs and side stories too, around 22 games is quite sad. Enough about that though, let's talk about what makes this game so good. This game was the introduction of Ezio, easily the series' most iconic and fleshed out character, and supported him with an interesting cast of characters and wonderfully realised world of 16th century Italy. Its refinement of the original game's mechanics made the gameplay much more enjoyable. You even have a home base you can upgrade as the game goes on, and the story was strong, with one of the most ridiculous endings I can think of. There's just about no complaints I have about this game, besides maybe a couple of the missions. If you're going to play any Assassin's Creed game, it should probably be this one. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Quickly following 2 was Brotherhood, a game which added a number of small but worthwhile features to the game, very few of which were ever seen again past the Ezio trilogy. Taking place almost entirely within Rome, this was a smaller game than 2, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. The story takes place immediately following that of 2, and revolves around Ezio building up the titular Brotherhood by destroying Borgia towers and recruiting citizens who can then be called upon during missions or sent on missions of their own. I actually really liked this feature, and the short-lived Facebook game that went along with it, but that honestly wasn't the deepest of inclusions. This game also probably has the best modern-day features of any entry in the series, where you could investigate Monteriggioni, Ezio's town from 2. The final feature it added was multiplayer, which sure is a thing that existed. Overall, I think this is equally as great as 2, and just as fun an experience. Assassin's Creed Revelations. Revelations is the point where the series first started to feel stale. The series added some incredibly boring features in this installment, such as the hook blade, a blade which let you slide down ropes and reach slightly further, and bombs. Remember bombs? Ubisoft sure wanted you to use bombs. There were bomb crafting stations everywhere, and I don't remember a single time I cared. Oh, and also the tower defense sections, where you had to defend an area of Constantinople from the Templars. This was where Ezio's story ended, as well as where the emphasis on the modern day story increased to its peak. The modern day sections were always the worst part of the games, and in this they were probably the worst they'd ever be. As the final part of Ezio's trilogy, it was a real letdown, failing to live up to either of the prior titles. That's not to say it was terrible, and there are definitely worse games in the series, but it's definitely the worst of this block. Assassin's Creed 3. Assassin's Creed 3. This was the height of Assassin's Creed fatigue for me, and luckily apparently for Ubisoft too. At least after this they made some changes, regardless of how I feel about them, but we'll get there soon enough. The story for this has some cool moments, especially the prologue, which is arguably one of the most memorable parts of the whole series, but was overall pretty forgettable. Connor at least is rather interesting, with his story of being caught between two worlds and not quite fitting in either, as both part Native American and part Englishman, as well as part assassin and part Templar. This was also the first entry in the series to have boats, which later became a major feature. All of this is kinda pointless though, because it just didn't feel that great to play. Past Brotherhood, the series just started to actually feel bad. The movement felt clunky and slow, and sadly it doesn't get any better for a while. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. I know my placement for this is probably the most controversial of all, but I honestly just don't like Black Flag. The characters are better and more memorable than those in 3 at least, though I remember even less of the story with this one. What I do remember is boats. Sailing boats, upgrading boats, fighting other boats, boats. While boats are fun, the game focuses way too heavily on them and just barely on the whole Assassin's Creed bit of Assassin's Creed. As a backdoor pilot for a pirate game, this works great, but as an entry to the Assassin's Creed series, this is easily my least favourite. Well, almost. Assassin's Creed Unity. Unity is bad. Okay, fine, I'll explain a bit more. This game released broken, and just feels awful. Movement felt bad, the story felt rushed, the game ran terribly, it was full of bugs, and with Anno it seemed they were trying to recapture Ezio, but failed miserably. While clearly the lowest point of the series, it did have at least some good points, such as the fight on top of Notre Dame. This is, though, as mentioned earlier, the only game in the main series I've yet to finish. I will do at some point though. Maybe. Probably not. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. This is probably my favourite Assassin's Creed game. While 2 is the best game in the series, I'd argue that Syndicate is up there too. Evie and Jacob are massive improvements over the previous protagonists, and switching between them for their different playstyles leads to a bit more depth to the gameplay. Perhaps the reason I like this so much is that in comparison to the last 3 games, this was much better. In fact, I had actually made the decision that if Syndicate had been bad, I wasn't going to buy another Assassin's Creed game ever again. Depending what you think though, perhaps that would be true either way. Assassin's Creed Origins. Now then, here's where things get complicated. As far as I'm concerned, traditional Assassin's Creed ended with Syndicate, and from this point on it's a different series. It's got a lot of the trappings of old Assassin's Creed, and hits the same story beats, but the gameplay is very different. The combat is arguably better now, in that at least it's not so formulaic, but the assassinations are gone, and without those is this even an Assassin's Creed game? At least this one tells the story of the origins of the Assassins organisation, even going so far as to show where the logo comes from. Bayek too was an interesting character, and I'll always love the setting of ancient Egypt, though the game feels quite rushed at points, especially near the start. For me, Origins struck a good balance between the old Assassin's Creed and the new direction for the series, though this balance didn't last long. Assassin's Creed Odyssey. At this point, it's got barely anything to do with Assassin's Creed. There's no assassins, no hidden blade even, and takes place the earliest in the timeline before the Creed is established in Origins. It has some of the pieces of Eden, and that's about it. I still like Odyssey. I especially like Cassandra, who is probably the best character in Assassin's Creed outside of Ezio, and to be honest I prefer her, though maybe that's just recency bias, or maybe because of how good she looks in a suit. No matter what though, this is probably the least Assassin's Creed of any game in the series. It's a good game, sure, though perhaps a bit long. Oh, and it has possibly my most hated feature in video games, level scaling. I hate level scaling. I want to feel strong, and level scaling just keeps you feeling the same the entire way through. As a game about ancient Greece, this game is fantastic. As an Assassin's Creed game though, it's just about okay. So now we're done, let's have a quick recap. In the best tier we have Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and Assassin's Creed Syndicate. In good, we have Assassin's Creed Revelations and Assassin's Creed Origins. In okay, we've got Assassin's Creed 3, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Assassin's Creed Black Flag goes in not good, and finally in bad we have Assassin's Creed Unity, because Unity is bad. Literally as I was finishing the script, they announced Assassin's Creed Valhalla, thus making this list almost outdated immediately. Oh well, I'll end up playing that either way, and I'll let you know where it fits then. It's not like any of these will move just because a new game came out, so I guess it's fine. Anyway, you can let me know if you disagree in the comments below, or on my Discord linked in the description. Thanks for watching.